but thank you for sharing and thank you for putting the message out. So it's very exciting to have our second episode of the Women Leading Show. So we are thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the episode 2 of the Women Leading Show. My name is Jo Baldwin-Trott. I am the author and editor of the Women Leading book. This is what prompted this show. So thank you, Mike, for the demonstration of the book. And there's a few here too, just in case you didn't quite get the branding. So I'm Jo Baldwin-Trott, and I'm thrilled to have with me today 5 authors. So our last show we had 4 authors, but this time we have 5 authors. Sorry, 4 authors and 5 guests. And we are going to be hearing from everyone here today. We also have an extra special guest called Sara Sabin. So it's really kind of Sara to join us today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to, we have Kim-adele, who is one of the authors from the book. She's coming all the way from Brampton today. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Jo, you're right.
It's the waving thing. You've got to do the waving thing. I don't know why. It's like you through a window. And my other amazing partner in crime, Jo Sumner, who is one of the head hosts of the show. Morning, Jo, from just up the road in Ealing.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. I'm going to now introduce Laurelle, who's a bit further up the road, up the M14 hanger left in Oxfordshire. Morning, Laurelle, one of our fellow authors.
Good morning, everybody.
Great to see you. And Mike is down back down the coast near Portsmouth. So morning, Mike.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Just. Yeah. Thanks for that. You can tell who was in the Navy. And good afternoon, sorry, to Sara. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming along. It's really great to see you. So I will introduce you properly as the show goes on. But first of all, we always start the show off with a bit of try and have as much as we can on Zoom. We try and have just a general, StreamYard as we're in now, but we try and just have a general topic conversation of what's been happening this week. So I'd like to bring our guests to the attention of something that happened this week, which was really interesting. The theme of this show is authentic leadership, and all of our guests will be discussing that topic today. But a very interesting thing happened this week, and it was to do with the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, who 10 years ago became the Prime Minister of Australia. She later, unfortunately, had to go on to create what was called the misogyny speech, and gave what I believe is one of the most powerful speeches ever given by a female leader. And this week, what happened was that one of her fellow Liberals, so her opponent, actually put a letter of apology, was actually published in The Guardian, to say that she was very, very sorry for her endless and single-minded pursuit to simply contribute to her community, to chase the elusive respect of men in my own party, and basically was apologizing for treating her very badly. So I'd like to throw it out there, and feel free to jump in on this conversation to you guys here about the fact that actually, even though there are women supporting women all around the world right now, sadly, there are women that actually just choose not to, and they come at it from a different angle. And I don't want to say any more than that. So feel free to chip in who would like to start kind of this conversation about this apologizing for actually being a very negative and a very different influence as a fellow female leader.
I'd love to jump in on that. I feel that it's really symptomatic actually of a shift that's beginning to happen away from what is quite a toxic way of women competing for approval, and towards a much more collaborative approach. And I actually think there's an element of leadership in putting your hand up and saying, I was wrong. You know, that is not the way to behave, and I don't encourage those who come after me to follow that model. It was the wrong way to behave. So I think that there's something really positive to be taken from it.
Jo, I'd like to completely agree with you, but actually go even further and say what's missing from politics today is people standing up and taking responsibility. That the ability to say, sorry, I got it wrong, seems to be missing from the political vocab. So it's quite unique to hear someone say that. And what I think is that when people do say that, actually, taking responsibility, then actually it endears them to people. I think people then think they're more authentic, rather than try and find mealy-mouthed excuses about why something didn't happen, or pass, as some people do, blame downwards, which is criminal in my view. You should always shoulder criticism. You pass praise downwards to everyone that's helped contribute to it, but as a leader, you should always respond. So it was really good to see that example this week.
Yeah, definitely. Would anyone else like to chip in?
So I was just going to say, I completely agree with everything everyone said. And I think there's a real lack sometimes of people feeling that they're able to be vulnerable, and they feel vulnerable if they've made a mistake and they've got to go in there and then admit it. But actually that vulnerability is their strength, because none of us are perfect. None of us are mistake free, are we? It's not the mistake that defines us. It's what we choose to do about it. And I think getting more people to stand up and acknowledge when they've got it wrong, and Mike, to your point, shoulder that responsibility, pass down the praise, is what's needed in leadership, whether that's any form of leadership, I think.
I think one of the issues with life in general is that we all think we have to be perfect, and that's not possible. And this move towards a more values-based leadership enables us not to be perfect, because we are human, and reaching out with self-responsibility and all of those kind of values makes life a lot more doable for everybody, male and female.
Yeah, I agree. And she does make a reference to the fact that she was only 20-something when she was on a complete, very dogged path to achieve her level of what she did within her career. So I think that's probably relevant. But I like what you said, Mike, actually, the fact that politics is renowned for not having an apologetic arm to it. And I think actually she set quite a good precedent, and hopefully, but I'd also like to come back to the fact that I really believe it's very important we support other women achieving. And I think the minority has done for too long. And actually, until we actually get over ourselves a little bit and we support each other, even though we may have opposing views, even though we may have different sort of levels of requirement. I think actually to be purposefully to be against someone as a female, who, especially in an area where there are so few females, I think there's a really sort of awkward and difficult and painful point to that I think actually it was really good that she made that it needs to change.
I was just about to add that, and I'm really conscious I'm the only male on this show this week. I think you had one man last week as well. So what I write about in the book is actually that women's brains are better wired from a neuroscientific, to doing this, actually, because they have a greater capacity for empathy and a greater collaborative gene in them. I'm generalizing, obviously, but that appears to be backed up by neuroscience. Actually, men need to look at women like the person you're talking about as role models, because actually more men need to act like that, because women appear to be better wired at actually doing the right thing, in my humble opinion, that is.
Yeah, well, and thanks for that, Mike, because obviously, what I'd like to do today is hear from both of you and Laurelle about what your beliefs are about leadership. So let's bring it back to you, as you kind of already given yourself a mini introduction. So I'm going to give you your proper introduction now, because you have enjoyed a 36-year career in the Royal Navy, during which you navigated a submarine to the North Pole twice. You commanded a nuclear-powered submarine, as you do, and you held a diplomatic post at the British Embassy in Washington during the period of 9/11. You've got an OBE for your part in planning and running the International Fleet Review in 2005. And you've since leaving the Navy, you've joined a group of social entrepreneurs, and you're a director of Building Pathways, which is a fantastic project to help employ people that are marginalised from employment. So let's bring it back to your chapter, Mike, and I think Kim has a question for you.
I do. So, Mike, you've got such a fascinating journey and always such insight, but I'd really like to understand a little bit more from you around your thoughts about how the difference in the way that we're made up and the neuroscience impacts our ability to really show up and be authentic.
Thank you, Kim-adele. Well, I am. Let me put my cards on the table to start with. I'm not a neuroscientific expert, but I have done quite a lot of reading about it. So I come with it with a little knowledge, which is always a little bit dangerous. But growing evidence from study upon study that men's brains and women's brains are wired differently, and actually from a leadership perspective, it would appear that the way that women's brains are wired actually are a much better way of leading. I'm generalizing because there's this empathetic gene and this collaborative gene that seems to be part of the wiring that enables them to touch people. Now, I think leadership is all about people. It's all, nothing else. It's all about people. It's about inspiring and motivating. It's about developing the people, supporting people, servant leadership, about supporting people. My time in the Navy taught me a huge number of lessons about the importance of people. I was, as Jo said, very lucky and privileged to command a nuclear-powered submarine, which is a very sophisticated and expensive bit of kit. But at the end of it, it's worthless until you put people in it and make the people work together as a team and as individuals. And so it's always about people. And so I was in the Navy largely for an era where ships were commanded by men because it was a male-dominated society. Fortunately now we've had women captains and they've been brilliant and successful, and we're looking in the very near future for our first female admiral, I think, which will be another glass ceiling broken gladly. But in terms of the neuroscience, the research that I did, I could see that actually the way that I commanded a submarine actually took a lot from the way that women lead, because actually going around shouting at people and telling them I'm the captain, this do what right, isn't in 99.9% of the right way to do it. It is in 0.1% when there's a crisis, an emergency, and you don't have time to have a debate. But most of the time, it's about getting people to work together collaboratively. And if you're in a cigar tube underwater for months on end with 120 of your best mates, actually that collaborative teamwork is really important. So an empathetic, collaborative style, which is, as I'm saying, better wired in women than men, is a better way of doing it. I look forward to our first female nuclear submarine captain. I think she'll be a great success.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful. Sorry, Jo, I think I just cut straight over you. I was just going to say it's amazing to see the kind of just the development of the journey and getting more people involved, and I'm guessing with having to lead in such difficult situations, the ability to link in and deal with your people must have been critical.
Yeah, it's the most important ingredient in anything. And I'm talking about the context of a submarine, but actually any organization, small or large, the people must come first. The people-centric leadership is the most important thing. And that sense of empathy, understanding them as well as yourself, self-awareness, and individuals as well as team, that's all part of what makes great leaders. So the better wired you are for that style of leadership, as Simon Sinek will back up, the better the organization would, there is lots of evidence that says that organizations do better in bad times when they're properly led. They're led by people that have that empathy, that collaborative, looking after people-centric leadership, than bad leadership. I mean, the evidence is there.
And I'd like to ask Mike, so obviously what would the forces look like if there were 50% female leaders? And what do you really think with if there were female leaders across the board? Do you think it would look different to what it does now?
Well, I think what would it look like? It would look more representative of society, which is 50-50. So
I kind of mean more to do with how it would be run, and obviously the operations, and obviously because when you look at the forces, that so much of it is reactionary. I get that, but not so much during peaceful times. I suppose is what you're saying, isn't it? But I'm putting you on the spot a bit earlier. But what do you think the forces would be like, or what would it look like if there was this utopian brain governing more so than what has been there?
Well, that's really interesting, because I think one of the things I can only speak for the Navy really, but one of the things the force is good at is teaching leadership from the day you join. So even if you're the most junior person, it's all about exploring your potential. So actually, this understanding people and putting people first and being collaborative and teamwork is kind of wired into us so in some respects the military, and this may sound counterintuitive from everything you read about the military and the stereotypes that are promulgated there, the shouty sergeants and the Colonel Blimps. The reality is that the leadership that's taught from when I joined the Navy onwards has always been more akin to the utopian brain that I talk about in the book. Just that we didn't phrase it like that, we didn't think about it like that. So I think actually it's a natural place for women with utopian brains to come and be part of, and I think the Navy or the forces won't look hugely different, because I think we kind of develop people in that way anyway. We just didn't realize it, and all I'm trying to do is point out actually we're doing that, and the result is that actually that's why the armed forces are held in such high esteem, because they have a leadership model that is better developed than actually perhaps outside.
So you're suggesting then that Commerce could take a leaf out of their book then, and maybe the police force, because the police force definitely hasn't been governed by utopian brain, which I can say from experience.
No, I can't speak for the police force, but you can obviously. But I absolutely, since I left the Navy 7.5, 8 years ago, I've seen a number of examples of organisations just ignoring some of the most basic tenets of leadership. People seem to be numbers on a spreadsheet, and there's no empathy. There's no sense of developing the people, engaging them. And 72% of people don't feel engaged at work. That is there's a lower number for people that work for female bosses. So I'm saying actually there's an awful lot of learning that civilian organisations, big and small, can learn from the military. And it isn't about how to win a war. It's about how to develop people.
Well, and I guess teamwork is pivotal. It's the key to any success, isn't it, within the forces? So therefore, because of that premise from the outset, whereas perhaps that's not necessarily the case for obviously a lot of industry, and also certain police forces can be very much about self-driven. So thank you, Mike. That's really fantastic. We are going to go. I mean, we could not have had two more opposite guests on the show, which is partly what we thought actually when myself, Jo, and Kim thought about this show and the topic of authentic leadership. So I'm really thrilled to introduce Laurelle Rond, who began her career as a musician, singer, and writer. She has developed a method of healing using therapeutic sound. She runs workshops on spiritual and psychological development, as well as working extensively with the voice as a practical method of empowerment. I can speak from experience because my course with Laurelle on the voice was pivotal in the change in my life. Her first novel was published in 2012, and she's just published her third, and she lives in Oxfordshire. Her chapter is titled The View from Mount Olympus, a perspective on values-based self-leadership. So welcome, Laurelle Rond. I have got always a gazillion questions for you, but let's keep it to authentic leadership and just ask you what you think that really means in today's world.
I think it's about putting ourselves back. We've become split. A long time ago, women had the leading role with a extremely long, thousands tens, hundreds of thousands of years of matriarchy. Then patriarchy came into existence once it was realized that men had something to do with the creative process, and they didn't just want to be the donkeys lifting everything and doing all the menial work. And so strength and physical strength became very important. Now, the ancient Greeks devised a series of myths to explain this change. And my chapter is all about that. So Zeus is the king of the gods on Mount Olympus. And at the beginning, there are 7 gods and 7 goddesses. So the gods have the masculine archetypes, light and shadow. The goddesses have the feminine archetypes, light and shadow. These are behaviors that we all engage in. And then Zeus, in his divine wisdom, decided to throw Hestia, the most important of the goddesses, and indeed his sister, off Mount Olympus, and to replace her with Dionysus, the god of wine and chaos. And we can see the result of this. So Hestia was allowed to be worshipped as long as she stayed down on earth by the hearth in her house, looking after the children and doing the cooking. And so there you have the explanation of patriarchy. Women were not allowed to go out into the world and do their thing. They weren't allowed to be leaders unless it was in the home. So for me, there is a split. The masculine archetype symbolizes the external world. The feminine archetype is the internal world. So we have celebrated the external world to the exclusion of the internal world. And as a healer, I came to the conclusion a very long time ago that healing takes place inside, not outside. It takes place inside first. We face our demons. Then we go to the outside to let them go. So what we need is the marriage between the two. So my chapter is about the way we need to bring Hestia back up into Mount Olympus so that she and Zeus can hold hands together in a brother and sister marriage of equality and use all of their qualities together. And the important thing for me is that first and foremost, we all learn to do this within ourselves individually, because we've all got male and female inside us. It's not gender at all. So women come in with an innate understanding of the feminine archetypes, and men generally with an innate understanding of the masculine ones. But women then need to learn the masculine ones, men need to learn the feminine ones. And of course, you've got all the stuff about trans, where you've got all sorts of things going on where you can't make definition. So does that answer your question?
Well, and it creates a gazillion others, obviously. But you know, I think what you've hit on is the fact that actually we have, where we are is there's been a path to where we are now, but we really need to recognise that we aren't really allowing both parts of our the way our energies work to exist and exist successfully, and that's for both men and women. Because in a female business owner, like we all are here, actually, it's very easy to let the dominant and task-driven side of our energy to take over. So I guess what I'd like to come back to is, so how do women lead authentically now from an energy point, and what can they do from your experience as a healer? And obviously you've healed thousands of people, I should imagine. So what can they do to allow that to exist as a happy relationship?
Okay, so the whole thing about healing anyone else is a fallacy. We have to heal ourselves. And this is the internal Hestia process. And this is why we need to heal the split and come together, collaborate, cooperate, do what the wonderful Jacinda Ardern is doing. She's introducing well-being and mindfulness and meditation into schools, because we learn the most when we're young. So the healing thing is really interesting. COVID, I think, has given us a massive opportunity. Before that time, the Dionysian chaos was becoming extremely prominent and evident with the environmental crisis. Then you get COVID, which comes and hits us, a tiny little virus. It goes inside our bodies. It's showing us we need to go inside. And interestingly, it's attacking our lungs. And environmentally, we've been deforesting, which is the lungs of the earth. So what we need is a combination of action and reflection. And if we can get that combination within ourselves and be clear and not be blocked, because energy is about moving or it's about blocking, and healing is about getting the energy moving again. So if we can get the energy moving again, then we can use the masculine action with the feminine respect that we need for ourselves, the sacredness. I think that's really important. We've forgotten that everything is sacred. Our computer is sacred. Our light is sacred, our food, everything. So if the computer doesn't work, we go, oh, you useless thing. We do the same thing to ourselves. If we make a mistake, we tell ourselves we're useless. No, bringing Hestia back up to Mount Olympus means that we treat ourselves and everything and everyone as sacred. That brings respect back into the equation. And with respect, we have space. We have more time, it's slower, and we can allow things to start growing again.
Wonderful. And I know, Jo, your chapter was very much focused on self-healing before you can lead properly and lead truly. So do you want to chip in there with that?
Well, I'm listening to Laurelle, just feeling like she's speaking my heart, and is so wise and eloquent in how she does it. My take on this is that the cap on our ability to do anything in life is our ability to do that within ourselves. So our cap on our ability to love someone else is how much we can love ourselves, how much we can lead others, how much we can lead ourselves. It's always the work in yourself first that allows you to go outside of yourself and to relate and ultimately to lead with impact and effectiveness. So I feel very strongly at one with what Laurelle is saying, and really lifted up by having that so passionately shared with us all. And hopefully our listeners are feeling the same.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jo. Brilliant. Well, we'll have an overall discussion in a minute, but I'd like to just bring in our third guest, who is a qualified an accountant, an entrepreneur, and a transformative coach. She is on a mission to coach purpose-driven leaders to build thriving teams and businesses. What a great mission. Having been through many transformations herself over the years, it wasn't until the most recent transformation that you really cracked it. So I am going to let Jo bring in a question here. Obviously, I'd like to know how you cracked it and what it was that cracked, so to speak. But let's, Jo, if you'd like to pose questions to Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, I'm really fascinated by actually your response to what Laurelle is talking about, because we were discussing authenticity in leading being absolutely critical, and understanding oneself being the foundation for how you as an individual can lead. And I just wondered what your response was to what Laurelle was saying, and what you want to add to that conversation.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that marriage between the inside and outside really resonated with me. And to describe something about my journey and to draw a contrast, when I came into the entrepreneurial world and I founded 2 startups, what I observed about leadership was based on what was around me, so what was on the outside. So I saw aggressiveness, I saw people kind of telling other people what to do, focus on profit over purpose. And I took on a lot of that. And what I found was that it was utterly exhausting because it was completely unnatural to me. And so by contrast now, what I'm finding is that in order to be an authentic leader, you actually have to do a lot of internal work. And that internal work is hard. It's easier to just kind of go on a course or draw examples from the world around you and apply that. But it's much harder to ask yourself these questions. Who am I? What are my values? Why am I doing all of this? And in what way do I want to serve people? But until you are clear on all of that and how that translates to you and how that affects everyone around you, you are not living in a way that is aligned with effective external leadership, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And I'd like to pick up something that we were talking about offline, which was the sources of our power in leadership, and really understanding where people can step into their power from. You know, what does that mean? People use that word about stepping into their power. What does that mean, and where does power come from in an individual?
So if you'd have asked me that maybe 5 years ago, I would have said, quite frankly, stepping into your power, what is that? I don't understand. I came across a model a few years ago now by a lady called Janet Hagberg, the stages of real power within an organization. And it talks about external power and internal power. So external power is, as the name suggests, is drawn from what is around us. So that's stage 3 of that is power by achievement. And that's what the world would class as successful. So you have a certain job title, you earn money, you live in a nice house, you have a nice car. But something is not quite right. So you're having this crisis of integrity at some point where you are just feeling lost and you're starting to ask those big questions. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And the problem with drawing all your power from external sources is, as COVID is now teaching us as well, all of that can be taken away from you in a second. And who is it that's left if all of those external things are taken away from you? So the stages of internal power start with power by reflection, which is this really, really turbulent experimental stage where you're trying to figure it all out and there's a massive internal chaos going on. And because it's so painful and because people generally don't like pain, what tends to happen is sometimes they want to go back to stage 3. So they're not quite committing to going forward to the internal stages of power. But what happens if you do the work and you progress through that, you get to stage 5, power by purpose. And when that happened to me, it was a really big realization that purpose is not about me, my ego, my goals, how much money I earn. It's about having a strong purpose to impact other people, to serve other people and the world around you. And I'm not going to say once you have your purpose, life's a peach and you just walk along, but at least you have some kind of strong connection to your internal power because you know at a deep level who you are, why you're here and what you're trying to do.
That makes, do you know what that does? That absolutely reassures me because for myself, I'm very purpose-led as a person, but I still have those moments where I re-enter the turmoil and stick with it and then emerge again, perhaps with eventually coming back to that purpose redefined slightly. But it makes me think about my coaching clients. That turmoil sometimes is almost intolerable, and it gives a model in which you can say stick with it, and this, you're exactly where you need to be in redefine your life in order to have that breakthrough. This is it, you're doing the actual work right now, and I find that very reassuring.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for clients to understand that, you know, to understand they're not alone, to understand that other people feel like that, and to understand that it's kind of a back and forth, that sometimes you do go back into that turmoil. And as you say, you then have to go back and redefine your purpose, but that it's ultimately worth it in the end to go through the growing pains, if you like.
Yeah, and I just want to pick on something you said actually, Sarah, was that that you mentioned the fact that when you looked at leading and how you ran a business, etc., that I think we have this historical and cultural belief about leadership relating to status, and status can mean the house, the car, the money, but actually, you know, the best leaders could be the leaders that have literally nothing. And I think actually it's a really good shift that's happening. It feels that actually we're endorsing people that don't have that, you know, the 300 million followers on YouTube and the house in Hollywood. They're actually people that are leading, and obviously Greta is one of them. I you know, naming one of the obvious ones. Leadership takes all sorts of forms, and it's always about your purpose. And once you have that clarity of purpose, which she absolutely does. And when I watched the interview with her and Rich Ashborough the other day, David, I always do that, David Ashborough, and it was fascinating because they were both so humble towards each other, and you couldn't get two more extreme leaders, but in my mind they are both absolute leaders. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to bring anything into this.
I'd like to pick up on that point about you get into this internal chaos, which is the internal part of learning to be a leader. But with that, you need courage. It's incredibly easy to not go that far, to distract yourself. Many of us will do that. We'll get drunk, whatever. The addictive things of Dionysus will catch us straight away. We need these masculine aspects in order to go through the feminine aspects. So again, you've got the marriage. So I don't think it's about going through the male and then going through the female. All the way through, you need to combine the two. And like what Greta and David, the same thing is with age. How wonderful that you've got youth and you've got someone who's very wise, and they're both speaking the same language. So it is irrespective of gender, of race, of age. We are people. And I love that. I think that's one of the great things that's come out of the current situation in this year.
Can I pick up on, Jo, your point, and Sarah, your point about self? But I think there are four components of a leader. We've spoken about purpose, we've spoken about team, you know, people-centric, and then there's self. And you talked about the trappings of leadership, you know, and actually I don't think you need the trappings of leadership. I think self is all about actually being a role model, setting a good example, showing people how it should be. Gandhi didn't have the trappings of, you know, mansions and cars and things like that, and yet he was an inspirational leader for what he was trying to do. So I don't think you need to have the trappings of a leader to be a good leader. I think you need to set a good example, and that should be the most important thing in terms of self.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Michael. I think it's a case of what people perceive to be associated with leadership. So I've had clients who demonstrate all of those natural leadership qualities, such as they are able to be vulnerable, they are able to say what needs to be said when no one else will say it, they're able to empathize. But when you ask them, do you feel that you're a leader? They really hesitate and they hold back. And I think that's because of the perceptions that are around about leadership, which are not true, because as you say, it's nothing to do with having a fancy car. It's about inspiring, motivating, and connecting with people.
And Jo, I've got a little story that illustrates this. Would you mind if I shared it about my time in the Navy?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, when I was in command of the submarine is 24/7. It's run, you don't park it at night, you don't park it at weekends. You're at sea, and so you have a watch system, like a shift system, and you have have officers of the watch that run the submarine for periods of time. When I first took command, I asked them to take their stripes off their uniforms. Because I wanted them to lead by example, not because they had stripes on. And they all, they all tried to kick back against us and said, well, how will people know that I'm the officer of the watch, the person in charge? And my example is because you will demonstrate that through your actions and through the way in which you conduct yourself. 2 months on, I asked them if they wanted to put the stripes back on again, and they said, no, we actually enjoy the fact that people respect us for who we are and what we do, not because we've got 2 gold stripes on our arms. So I thought that was a really good example about who you are and your actions, rather than what you've got on a bit of paper or on your sleeves.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's the big shift that I was talking about, really, that I feel that we're recognizing, and it very much is relevant, because that's what a good leader should be. And obviously adversely what a bad leader is, because we're seeing various degrees and combinations of leadership right now. So it's a really, like you were saying, Laurelle, with this situation, has created so many in our face problems, if you like, but also discrepancies. And obviously the variety of leadership on the planet right now, it could not be more extreme. I mean, it's just incredible, really, isn't it? Laurelle, do you want to go on more about that? Because I know you've got more views on that.
Well, I think that the leadership thing for many women is about confidence. And I think the leadership thing at the moment for many men, forgive me for generalizing, is about ego. And what we're seeing is a rising up of one and a collapsing of the other, which will eventually even itself out. There are many women, I think, Sarah, you would agree with this, that you say to them, do you think you're a leader? And they will say no. I'm interested, Sarah, do men equally not have the confidence in their leadership? Is this a gender thing?
Well, again, I hate generalizing, but what I see is more reticence on the part of women to say, I'm a leader. You can almost see a visible shrinking sometimes when asked the question.
Yeah. And that has got to be one of the things currently that we have to deal with is, and going right back to the beginning, Jo, when you said women and men, we need to support each other. We need to allow everyone to be the unique person they are and to shine. It is not competitive. It's not about who's better than. It's about us all contributing to this extraordinary jigsaw that human life is. And if we all contribute, then we will all be able to lead to what could be a phenomenal existence on a phenomenal planet.
For the record, I know plenty of men who don't think they are leadership material in any way, and when in reality they are. And it's about persuading them and women that actually it's about what they can do, not what they can't do. So it is a generalization, but I know plenty of men that don't think they can be leaders, and they can.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And, in my work with 50 Parliament, there are so many women that actually, one of their biggest fears is actually that they will be seen as a leader. And they really, it's almost, sadly, it's become a label that people, and a lot of women don't want and they shy away from, for many reasons. But also, I think one of the very main significant reasons that comes to light is that they see the type of leadership that exists today, and the aggression and the ego, as you said, Laurelle, and they shy away from it. And they think, well, how can I compete with that? How can I parry that? How can I be in the same room with that? And it literally puts women off from standing for Parliament, because they just can't bear the thought of having to be in the House of Commons dealing with that kind of aggression. And it's tragic, but like you say, Laurelle, it's all about working together and actually supporting each other on that journey, and then eventually diluting this aggression and ego across the board, because there are women, as you mentioned, Mike, in your chapter, we've had women running this country that very much lead from a very aggressive ego stance. So it's not just men, but I think it's recognising them both. Kim, I feel like we haven't heard much from you, and you coach leaders. Is there anything you would like to add into this?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, I spend a lot of time with leaders, and I think one of the things that stops leaders stepping into their leadership is actually when you think about what makes a good leader, and you think about what's a good leader for you, we use words like they're inspiring, they engage with us, they understand us, they're great storytellers. They're all big things. And actually to admit that you are one of those takes ego. And actually the people that are really good at it and actually lead effortlessly often come at it with very low ego, and therefore they don't see that connection for themselves, because it almost goes against their nature to see themselves as good, as able and as competent to do that. So I spend a lot of time with, helping people see what other people can see. And I guess, Mike, that's almost like to your point, where there's some men who are great leaders, and there are, who don't see that that is actually what they're doing. They are going in and they're inspiring. You know, how bad we are as human beings at actually accepting compliments. You know, we immediately, the minute somebody tells us we've done something good, or even down to, you know, you've got that dress is lovely, and you go, oh, this old thing, you know, I've had it forever. It was a tenner, because we kind of struggle to step in and just say thank you, full stop, and take that internally without worrying about that ego and what people might think of us. I think that seems to be the thing that most of my clients have got the biggest challenge with, is how do they connect to being that leader and then really owning it and going out there and turning the volume up on all of the great things that they just do naturally. And it is, as you guys have all been saying, it's all about people. It's, you know, I've got the best job in the world. I get to listen to people's stories. I mean, what an amazing way to make a living, to hear people's stories and to ask questions, to understand them more. And I think, you know, that's at the basis of what all of us want to be as human beings. We want to be understood and we want to be listened to. And we have to do that for ourselves first before we can do it for others, I guess. So it's been fascinating, and apologies, I've just been absorbed in the debate as opposed to contributing to it. So forgive me for being voyeuristic.
No, that's fine. And thank you so much. I think you've actually summarised the session really, and it's the show. It's been great. We have all these different opinions, but actually we're all kind of coming from the same point that you need to connect with yourself, you need to do the work, and then you're able to be more visible and able to step into that spotlight, because leading does require a spotlight. It doesn't need to be full, doesn't need to be on full. It just needs to be a tiny bit brighter than the people that are with you, so that you can lead by example, as you explained, Mike. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. I'd like to especially thank Sara Sabin for coming along, who is a phenomenal coach. So please look her up. We will post all the details of links, etc., when we share this video. And also to Mike Davis Marks, who is one of our authors from Women Leading. Thank you for joining us, Mike. Brilliant. And Laurelle Rond, thank you so much for coming along and giving your very adverse point of view, both of you, but we've done very well. And no fighting, which is good.
It wasn't adverse, it was diverse. Not
Oh, that's right. It's been a long week. Sorry, Mike. But it's Friday. I'm ready for that. Either a glass of wine, maybe a bit early. But so yeah, thank you so much for coming along. As always, a very big thanks to Jo, Sumner and Kim-adele Platts for your support and your help getting this show off the road. We are by and large the authors of the Women Leading book, and which is a movement, a message, and I think today's show has really just absolutely epitomised that we are all having different views, different opinions, but actually very much purposeful to try and encourage more women to lead and more mentally differently, for women to lead differently, but do this as a team effort, which it has been today. So thank you guys. Our next show will be in 2 weeks' time, and I'm thrilled to say that we'll have Nish Ranasinghe as our guest author And we'll also have career vision coach Grace Ong. The topic of that show will be rising high in the corporate world. Always a challenge for anyone, but that will be from a female's perspective. So thank you guys for today. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and please comment, please share, and spread the word. This is us. This is the Women Leading Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.